when you read it through the first time, and that's what I did as well, is to like just mark anything that kind of works. All right, I shared it. See if it pops up for you. And I just kind of mark everything. I don't, things that hit me, things that strike me. So you end up with a lot of post-its, like I said, and then you narrow them down. The best way for us to narrow that down, though, is to decide, do we have a specific focus? Something that we've seen from the kids' work, from what they've been doing, that we feel like we need to build upon to help them. And I know when we did that one performance assessment, I don't know if there's things back from that you would like to, on character work, but this story, I feel like you could do character work, you could do theme, just even how, even some author's craft, because there was flashback in there, and how he's referring things. So, but, the whole purpose of that read aloud is to encompass many things, but but you can't do everything, It's
So
you have to
like-
kind of think of your thing is over time, what am I going to do?
So that was my first question for you on read aloud. Is it supposed to be focused, or is it supposed to be broad and encompassing?
Well, it can be both.
Because, I think, so I marked lots of spots in here
Yes.
that were about lots of different things.
Right.
I know that you've talked in the past about how you shouldn't stop so often in read aloud. Like, kids need to hear you read across a distance. So
Right.
obviously we can't stop at every one of these spots.
Right.
But if every time we're stopping, we're focusing on a different skill, then that doesn't let them see us tracking something over a distance of time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If I do character the first time I stop, and theme the next time I stop, and author craft, then I either need to find a tie between those so that they understand why I'm stopping, or I need to just focus my attention. In read aloud today, we're really going to focus on character, and then just let it be about character.
So I think it's a excellent question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. When I think of read aloud over the time in my process of the year, there are times that I will focus it on certain things because of the type of book I'm reading. Like when I think of when we read Witch and Wizard, there were two characters in that whole book, 2 points of views constantly. So it was great throughout that book to show those two characters and what that is. But then we were also understanding that dystopian sci-fi genre with the kids. So we were also looking at that as we were reading it. So there were certain things throughout that story that we were focusing on because of the unit we were doing and because of just what the book lended itself to. Now, that doesn't mean, though, I didn't talk about setting and I didn't talk about author's craft, because the other thing I noticed in that book was all the metaphors they had. That writer has so many metaphors. So it was a great thing to also point out with the kids. And as we think about, when I was in Dan's class doing that the other day, I was talking to the kids about when you're getting into those higher level text, W, X, Y, Z, you're tracking all different types of things. So how I do a read aloud with a younger grade, because they're in a lower band, is going to be different than how I'm going to do it with a higher grade, because the higher you get, they are going to have to track more things. They are going to do more than just one thing. But depending on how long my read aloud is or what I'm going to do, over time I'm going to touch on different things. So there's some things I always do. I always teach the kids that after we've read a page or two, if it's a short story or the first chapter, we always as a reader want to stop and say, who is in the story? What does this seem to be about? What's the problem? What do we know about the different characters that are in the story? What kind of places does this seem to be taking place in? So that we have that background before we continue to read. Because as I tell kids, I'm doing that with a student right now. He's reading Gregor, the Overlander, which is what we need to do to get his reading level up, is to read a more complicated thing. And we just made in his book, I said, well, we read the first chapter. Now, what are all the characters we have? Oh my gosh, there's 10 characters. I said, all right, so we're going to write all these characters down with columns, and you're going to need to jot down things on them because that's part of what will get confusing. As I explained to him, is that you're going to have a lot of characters to track. So you're going to want to track this as you're reading a story. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about what the problem is and what the setting is. I might mention that. So when we're stopping, if you really think about it, it ends up being 5 times. It's what we say before we start. We'll stop about 3 times during the story, and then the end. There's usually what I call the end, if that makes sense. So through there, if you've been doing something with the kids, and I'm thinking back to that performance assessment we did, they at that point were having trouble really giving us some details about characters. They weren't really digging in. This story, we could do some of that with. It would work. Because there's how he reacts, what he thinks about, what he talks about, the whole thing. He's supposed to get up the mountain. Does he give up or not give up? But I also feel like we could touch on theme, too, at the end and say, what was the message of the story? Now looking at the character and how that could lead us to the theme. That could be one thing we could do.
So a lot of my...
So what were your steps? Why don't you tell me what your steps were?
I mean, I had something right away in the beginning, like, what is the setting? I think we still have kids who would have a hard time just being descriptive and telling us what the setting was. They're going to say Mount Cinder. What about that? So right away in the beginning, there's actually a really good description of it that they could pull lots of details from. But then the next part is about the symbolism of that. And so the setting is obviously a symbol for something, so that's starting to do more theme work. If they can identify the setting, then what is the symbolism of that?
Right.
And then on 32, I started pulling in like literary elements, so it said like bullying heat. And so it's still setting, but now it's what is the author doing when they're saying the heat was bullying. And so that's not direct language, and you could talk about figurative language.
Right.
Then I had stuff about character and emotional timelines and seeing how that fit in. And then I had the flashback marked.
Yep.
That was something that happened in there. Now, in thinking about the flashback, I think you could continue talking about setting and how the setting was kind of established in the flashback, or the character's ideas about where he was going were established, or Dad's opinion of where he was going were established. And then when he gets there, how different it is than what he's been promised. So the dad is kind of promised one setting, and the A-frame tents, and the perfects, and the whatever. And then when he gets there, it's totally different. And I had some about, like, what kind of person are different people. So Russ, what kind of person is he? What kind of person is Joey? There were a lot of different characters in it that they could track.
Right.
And then the event of the kid falling on the mountain, and why don't they just leave him, and what's going on there.
Joey, yeah.
Then kind of the character change, like we see him change his mindset of he's going to get up there, but then the disappointment at the end. So he gets up there and he's been promised this great aha moment. And he tried to feel different. And he
I love
at the
that.
mountain
How come I feel? Do I look different? I love that part.
And then it was super funny to me how it ended, where Russ said, "Everybody up! It's 2 miles to Horseshoe Lake." Like,
yeah, right.
He's feeling all
hanging.
accomplished that he's done this, and the guy is like, "Okay, good job. 2 miles." He doesn't even say good job. He's just like,
yeah, right,
"Everybody up! 2 more miles to go."
Right.
So setting to me in the story seemed really important. I mean, the fact that it was taking place on Mount Cinder, there's a lot of figurative language with Mount Cinder. Mount Cinder is obviously a symbol for other things in life, so you could talk about symbolism and theme and how that ties together. So as I was reading it, I was thinking if I have to focus kind of on one thing, setting seemed to be something that was going to allow me to also pull in figurative language and theme and the flashback kind of all under the umbrella
Upsetting.
of today we're going to talk about setting. We're going to focus on setting of the story.
Well, and I just found there was so much in this, like, just to step back a minute, like when you were talking about, each time you do read aloud, it might be a little bit different, depending if it's going to be more broad or it's going to be focused. And I feel like even, like when I think about Mamie, Leon, just even chapter-wise. Like some chapters, I think we can read without doing a lot of stopping. Then there's other
Right.
chapters where you start feeling like we could stop, and really sort of encompass a lot of points. So I guess it's interesting listening. I didn't focus so much on the setting in here. Like
Yeah.
when I read this, I was like, there's just so much. I mean, you could just stop like every paragraph. You could stop
Right.
constantly in
Right.
this one. And I ended up focusing a little bit more on sort of the lesson and the theme. And
Mhm.
mine was a little bit more about the characters and then the lessons and the, the strength of the characters and the life lesson that Russ was trying to teach and show the boys, and how you see the weakness and how they overcome them, and the reflection, how at one point he's reflecting on his past, almost as if you see a breakthrough moment that he's going to get something out of this emotional change, but then he seems to go on and he doesn't.
Do you ever read aloud with a
Yes.
different lens?
Sometimes I do, yes. Especially, and that's what I was going to say, is that not a book because it's too
Right.
long, but these types of stories, when they're short like that, I do that. Like Those Shoes is one that I would pull in when we were doing social issues, but I'd also do it when we were doing character work at the beginning of the year. So the kids would have heard it at the beginning of the year, but then when we got into social issues, I was pulling that in again just because they looked at it a different way. And
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of teaching kids that there's so much to be keeping track of in the story. So if we read this and we really focus on setting, and they think they've done really hard thinking work on setting, and then you change lenses, and the next time you read it, you're going to focus on character, and again they realize all the really hard thinking work they do at character, and then can you have the conversation of, this is the same story, so this is all the thinking work that needs to go on as you're reading, and there's so many layers that the author has layered in there. You know, I focused on setting, the Zimmerman focused on character. We saw the story differently because of what we focused on. As good readers, you really need to be focusing on all of it kind of simultaneously, or if you're not focusing on all of it, then you might need to reread to see what you've missed as a reader.
well, and I think
Or
like
what
you
else
just
you
said,
can- or
doing,
what else you can get from it.
yes,
I mean,
what
you
else can
read
you?
it, now what else can I get through the second or third time?
Well, if you think about close reading and think about the rereading, those skills that we teach kids, there's nothing wrong with pulling it back in and doing that kind of thing. Because you can't, I think, the tendency with a read aloud, think aloud type of thing is, oh my gosh, there's so much we have to do. How in the world do I cover everything? And that's where really I feel like we need to look at what is the work our kids need to be doing, or what's the unit we're in right now. Sometimes I'm actually looking to my next unit and thinking about what's going to be coming up. And I actually, in my read aloud, start to point these things out before I ever teach them, so that they've had some exposure, so that when we get to that unit, they'll have had, oh, we've talked about this before. So there's a lot of ways to use a read aloud. And I know one of the things we talked about is we've got kids, we need to move them up the level. We need to move them to the next thing. So I feel like that's where we can look at the text band, and then maybe look for a chart to help focus what they're tracking as they're reading, as one of the things that they're tracking. Because it's like that, is it the UVW?
That's what we're trying to move on into.
So characters, they're tracking, adults become important, it says. They're tracking a lot of characters. Trickiness is that there's going to be clues about the story. Plot, multiple things going on. Here we go. Characters and setting at this level become symbolic of bigger themes. So now you both kind of hit already, didn't you? Theme, setting. That's one of the things. Readers benefit from wondering whether the setting could be a symbol for the theme or the issue in the lives of the characters. Everything could be symbolic, and the symbols might not be repeated across the text like they are in RST. Entire chapters may jump back in time. Now, this is a short story, so all of a sudden, but there is that flashback. All of a sudden, there is that. So that structure. Do you see where I'm looking at?
Yeah,
On this, and then if I look on.
In Katie's chart, she had the same thing, and then she has a chart with it. Setting her character, this could be a symbol of the theme of, I think this because, and it's that same thing you just read off. Characters and setting at this level become symbolic of bigger themes.
So that what I awesome like to, oh, I see. Okay, now I see it. I like to put things in a chart form just because I feel like it helps kids organize. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have a spot they're still jotting other, because like some kids I say, you're always going to want to track the events. So it might be that one page has the chart and the other is where they're tracking events, making notes of things that are, that they want to remember. Because I always talk to kids about that. During read alouds, your great opportunity to jot because you're not holding the book, you're not having to read. You can jot as you're hearing things. So maybe what you want to do is decide which thing, because we have all kinds of stuff with the setting, different things we could do. Is there one that fits that you guys like?
I mean, I like the one you read. It's on the UVWX page.
Yeah, I was on the wrong page.
And then it's that same thing you read from your text bank. Character and setting at this level becomes symbolic of bigger themes.
Mm-hmm.
Readers benefit from whether the setting could be a symbol for the theme. In the lives of the characters, everything could be symbolic, and symbols might not be repeated.
Yes.
I think that
there we
brings
go.
in
Mhm.
the character stuff that Holly had marked. What are the things that we see the characters going through that hint towards the theme. And the setting work that I had pulled in, what is Mount Cinder a symbol of? We can look at the flashback. What is the flashback? And what was camp a symbol of for Dad, or what was camp a symbol of for the boy? How did they see camp differently? I feel like the boy felt like he was being shipped away, and Dad felt like he was giving him this place to go.
Character development thing where we make you stronger.
Yeah,
You're-
the boy and the dad saw camp differently. That setting was a different symbol for them in their life.
Toughen them up a little bit, I felt like, because of that whole, you'd sit on your mom's lap. I
Yeah.
loved that. I thought that was hilarious because he said he would. That made it even funnier to me. Yeah, so I'm going to make a man out of you by sending
So I
you to
think
this
having
camp.
them use something like that
Mm-hmm.
brings in the setting and the character stuff, and really uses the focus of theme. How we're setting character, now pointing us towards what the theme of the story is.
So how do you feel about that, Holly?
Good.
Like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
I think that's right on.
Mm-hmm. I do too, because I think that's part of that whole, also then gets into that whole author's craft and how they're using it, and we're just thinking about the testing that we're doing too, getting them to think at more than just the characters, the bigger picture of what's going on. So, do you want me to put that chart in that tab part for you? Do you want the exact same chart?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure,
yeah. Does that organize? it?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I just
Wow.
want to clarify you're okay with that while you're doing the things. So then the next step is then to look at, where are we going to stop and point things out, and in various ways we can do that, turn and talk, all that kind of stuff. Because we can't point everything out, but one of the things that I will do, even though I don't necessarily talk about everything, I also fill this chart out, have it filled out. I do it ahead of time and then flip my slides to show stuff. And we'll show that there's things I haven't talked about that are on there too. Do you know what I mean? So
Okay, yeah.
I will have things on that chart that maybe I don't point out right away or necessarily stop to show them, but to show that my thinking's still there. And
Okay.
I'll say, the kids start to over time realize, oh, there's other things they're going to put down than just what we pointed out, because they might see something we didn't see. Does that make sense? And that's where that getting them jotting their jotting to me is the proof of what that thinking is, and they're becoming aware of their thinking in their head. So that's where, to me, for read aloud, I love having kids jot a lot, because I can see what their thinking is. They won't jot as much when they're reading themselves, but if they can show me they can do it in the read aloud, my hope is that that's transferring, if that makes sense. I mean, they still should jot, obviously, that's one of our expectations, but not to the extent then, so one of the questions is the length of this story is 8 pages. You could do it in one day if you wanted. It'd be packed to, get it done in our time frame. Or do you want to divide it into 2 to to divide it up a little bit? It's up to you. I like, unless it's super short, because like I use some of those campfire weenie stories and it could be like 3 pages long, that I can't really divide into 2 days. But even when I get into that 8 or 9 page range, then sometimes I do, because then if you think about it, now we've taken 8 pages, we're doing 4, and I'm actually adding more stops. Do you know what I mean? But yet, still kind of keeping, I'm only going to stop in the time I'm reading 3 times or whatever, 2 or 3 times. But I also like the idea that they sit and think about it before we come back to it the next day. And sometimes then I can pull in a different thought. As you think back, or what are you thinking about? What stuck with you about the story, or whatever. So it's up to you, whichever way you want to do it.
I would think dividing it up. Again, I think there's so much in here that I think you could almost start losing them too, because there could be so much to talk about. So.
There really is. Isn't that crazy how that little story can have so much in it? Yeah, this is one of my favorite ones in here. The little boy just cracks me up. So first then, I would say let's figure out, where do you guys feel is a good stopping point? Remember, with a stopping point, we want a little bit of that. Keeps them hanging. Where you get the reaction of, don't stop, keep going. Is there a spot that struck you that way?
I know let's see here. I'm on page 33, wouldn't be bad, but that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. Maybe not quite far enough, though.
Well, like middle of 34, when Joey falls, Joey Becker rolled 10 feet down the mountain. Hey, someone shouted, hold up. We all looked at one another. Although most of us liked Joey, none of us wanted to lose 10 feet to retrieve him.
Stop there.
Are they going to just leave it?
Why don't you just come back for him later?
I know, that just cracks me up. That they're all too tired. They don't want to do it,
It's approximately halfway.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good spot, because the kids are all going to go, well, what happened? What did they do? Where are you at? The other spot I had was at the bottom of the page, where it says, how is Russ called to him, because I think Dirk goes back. And then it leaves with dead, I thought, and then that was it. That was another spot I've had too. Sometimes I've stopped at.
So at the bottom of 34?
It just depends on where you want to leave with them. If you want to stop it before they go retrieve them, which I think would work just fine, or if you want to leave him, is he okay or not okay? It just depends on how long, because after that, what do we have? 1, 2, 3.5 pages. It just depends on how much you want. It doesn't matter to me. I was just sharing one of the spots I had.
Any place on 34.
Yeah, I think anything on there. You just decide.
midway.
So
And maybe stick with the first one, and maybe depending on how many stopping points we have, we can adjust it.
If we need to.
so that spot you were saying, so I'm gonna write on the top. I'm just gonna write day 1 that we're ending at.
Page 34.
None of us wanted to lose 20 feet.
Oh, that, okay. I'm just gonna I'll put the wording in there. None of us lose 10 feet. Okay. So then day 2, we'll go start there. And then we can, like you said, adjust if you need to. Sometimes when you plan, that happens. So when I start the next day, I always back up just a little bit. You know,
Yeah, I liked that point too about regrouping, being able to get the kids to regroup, like doing those sentences.
it is, I learned, I mean, that was a technique I learned, and I remember I never trained the kids on how to do it. I just did it, and they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time it took a little bit, I mean, I knew to give a little bit longer to read, but it's kind of nice, not, instead of always doing the 3, 2, 1, all right, readers can have your, whatever. It just, because the kids, you'll notice, they'll go, shh, she's back to the part, that I know. It's just a very nice way of doing it. And it kind of pulls them back into what it was. And some kids will be right there, but it also gives them a chance to finish their sentence. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's that combination of giving them a little bit of a moment. Okay, so now what we want to do is chart out what we're going to do. So my questions here make no sense because it's the first time we're reading it, so I'll take those out. So the only thing before reading, what do you want to set them up for? It's always good to give a little bit of background. What do you want to set them up for? There's a couple ways you could go about it.
Okay, I'm sorry, ask the question again.
So before we're going to do the read aloud, how do you want to set it up? I'm going to read a story, Mount Cinder. What do you want to tell them?
Can we go back? I mean, we've read a different story from this book, so we could go back to the beginning of the year when we read the story about the kid and the tape and the whatever.
My side of the story.
My side of the story.
Did you also read Carrots or no?
No.
Oh.
My side of the story.
Is that the only one, really?
Mhm.
I wonder who reads Carrots. Okay.
Um,
That's just another super fun one to read.
so that was the one that we read at the beginning of the year. I think the kids will remember it because I shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" at them. Because that's what it says in the story.
Well, and that's
excellent.
in Carrots too. Carrots has
is-
something like that too.
Which is excellent.
The dad, it's the dad, right? That says that.
I mean, sticking the tape on the head was
Yeah.
a pretty memorable
Yes.
short
Mhm.
story that we read. So we could go back to that and see if they recall things about the character and what did we think about him and what did we think about his family. What did we think about the dad? Because dad's going to come up in this story again. And try to do some retrieval of what do we already know about these characters.
So kind of setting up that background and actually going back to that giving a context for it again.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay. So so it's really kind of that background skill is really kind of the background information, and then setting the context because we know some of that. So you'll want to write down. What I like about this is that with this planning, hopefully you'll have that. Pull the story out, you can pull that out again and see if it, I always often adjust, but because then you've got for next year.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? By us planning.
So then we list specifically what the
Yeah.
questions would be?
Mm-hmm. How many of you remember when we read the story, my side of the story at the beginning here? You might give them a little, remember that was the one about the boys, big brother and little brother, right? They were fighting,
Mm-hmm.
and the one ended up with tape in his hair. Computer keeps going off and on.
I think we talked about perspectives on that one too, didn't we? Bringing dad's perspective, we compared it to the boy's perspective.
Mm-hmm. So, and here's where you can decide, do you want to just think about it and like have them think, or, or sometimes when I'm doing this, I might do as I'm talking about this, jot down what you remember. What kinds are some of the things that you're remembering as I'm telling you about the story? Or you ask some of these questions and say, and then take a couple minutes, turn to talk. What do you remember about the da 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 da, theme setting, whatever, and then on your screen, because I make slides for my read alouds too, I'll put my side of the story, I'll write a little bit about what I'm saying, and then the questions that I want them to chat about, and they're turning into talking.
Okay.
So it just depends on what you want to do. Any of those are dandy fine things to do. Somehow we want them to me, I always like them to either jot or turn and talk, so it's not just in their head.
Mm-hmm.
They have a chance to engage. To me, that engages them a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So maybe turn and talk.
So now I'll go over on that side. What you're going to have to do. I'll take the choose one. Perfect. Now for the chart, when do you want the kids to make that chart? Do you want them to make it at the beginning of the read aloud? Or, I don't know, have you guys ever done that with your CPR, where that's what I used to do a lot of? Good morning everybody, how's your day today? Take your read aloud book and make this chart in your notebook. That way, I'd have them do that then, as they came into the room, so it didn't take from my read aloud time or my other thing. Or do you want to give them a chart and they stick it in their notebook? I mean, whatever
That's
you.
often what we do, but-
Yeah, because now that I'm thinking about it, you have a lot of. This is the co-teaching class that needs it, so maybe you want to make it ahead of time, and then they could easily stick it in their notebook. Mm-hmm.
And we've done our CPA slides before, like pick up the chart. Like I have them sitting there,
Mhm.
and the slide tells them, like pick up the chart from the chair, from the table, from
Which is a great management thing, because then it's done before,
the.
and that way you're ready to go.
Okay, so.
So maybe make a note
maybe
that
get rid of the
somewhere.
others. What do you want that?
Well, actually, chart.
Put the
Let's put it
chart.
right where the chart is. Create chart for students to pick up before, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Then you know that you want to do that.
So they're gonna turn
There.
and talk about what they remember
Mm-hmm.
about the story and the characters.
So that just gives them a little bit of background, because we've had that other story. And you might, one of those things when they're turning and talking, then listen to see what they get. There might be a few, you could do a couple things. Then you could make a slide that just highlights some of that. The things, hey, just, I heard some of you guys talking, just in case, here's, let's just look through and see if there's anything that I feel would be important for you to remember. And then you could show them. But I always think it's good to see, because if you walk around, if you're listening in and they're all like, I don't remember that story, then you can stop right away and say, okay, some of your help, having not really remembering what it is, let me just give you a little background and of what it is, to remember our characters. But that's that. And you only want to give them a minute to, just a short period of time to chat, just to activate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually amazing when I've watched videos of LLI stuff and different things, where I'm watching them do those things, and I think, how can they do this whole part in such a short period of time?
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm watching it, and it's really only a minute, and I'm like, wow, you really actually can accomplish more in that time than it seems.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like a lot, but if they're, you guys have done a really good job with that, getting them focused so they can do a lot. So then our next thing is, what's your first, actually, now I guess now what I would say is decide how many times we're gonna stop in that. Because we're obviously gonna wanna say something at the end, when we're done reading, to have some sort of thinking. And it might even, I don't know which way you wanna work. Do you wanna work backwards, or you wanna work forward? Sometimes I like to know my end. This is what I'm gonna ask at the end, and that helps me set up the rest. And sometimes I like to work from the front, and then that helps me figure out my end. So, what works for you two? What would you like to do?
I mean, I think for this, looking at the chart that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
I think the symbolism of the setting is pretty like smack you in the face in the first two paragraphs. And so to point out the smack you in the face part is a good, like, concrete way to get them started.
I agree. Very good. Mm-hmm.
That we need a concrete example, because then after that the symbolism isn't quite as concrete. So if we give them something really solid at the start to fill in their table, so that they see the setting of Mount Cinder is a symbol of this, I think this because, as a really concrete. So I think in terms of planning, like, we have to plan to stop someplace on this first page where it's really smack you in the face.
So then let's figure out where you want to stop, and then I would use our chart that we have at the top to fill in those pieces.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
then you can flick up the slide that they see it. I'm kind of I mean, you can fill it in as you want, but I'm always such a time that I like to have it on, or I just flip the slide and it's on there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But if you want to write it, you can. I'm just
Well, and it's a little bit different with our co-taught class because there's two of us.
Right.
Yes.
Sometimes for Read Aloud, like, one of us has the chart under the document
Right.
camera and is filling it in like a student.
which you could do that as well. I kind of forget about that. You're both
But then in my
there.
afternoon class, then it's nice to just
Have
have
it.
it that I can toss up there and say this is what it is. So
So that might be a thing to decide what you want to do. If one of you is going to jot as you go, so they see that. Especially with those lower kids, I think that's a really good thing. But then let's fill it out so you. I don't know about you, but
Right, to
sometimes when I'm
have-
on the spot, I like
Right.
having it right there, so I
Right.
don't have to think about it.
Right.
Because I'm also monitoring kids and doing all
Right.
that other stuff.
Yeah, I know that's always helpful for me. So, okay, and I got kids in my room,
kids.
so that will, but. Okay.
So do we want to
So-
reconvene to continue planning? Should Holly and I try to plan our stopping points and send you what we think we're gonna do, and you wanna look at it?
Yeah, because I think with our conversation, I feel like you know what you want to do and where you want to proceed from here. And so why don't you fill it in, and I've got it. Just email me and tell me, take a look, and then and do that. Do you know what day you're going to do this then?
The day after we get it done.
Okay. So my
It is not
question.
definitively on the
My
calendar.
question is, would you like me to come in and then watch at all or not? It's up to you.
Sure. Sure.
So whenever that is, just,
Let me know.
yeah, let me know and then I'll come in and watch.
And Wednesday and Thursday you're with Port Washington.
But depending on I'm actually going to be in, I might be able to come in on Thursday because I'm going to go in Heidi's room during her time. And depending on what time it is, let me look at their schedule. If I don't have to be talking to them and they're in classrooms, I don't need to be with
I
them.
think on Thursday they're with us.
Yes.
Yes, they would be in our room.
So, that would work.
So, okay.
Okay,
Perfect.
great.
Bye, camera. It's been nice.